To the NFL now, and it's time for Fowler's 5. 5 headlines that we need to get to and get some answers on here with the quickness. He is Jeremy Fowler, and he's going to give us those answers. Here we go with the 5. We're going to use the touchscreen, so everybody buckle up. Aaron Rodgers is first. Nailed it. June 1st is tomorrow. What is the deal?
Well, the deal is the Steelers are just kind of hanging right now, Shay. When I talk to people with the team, they say the same thing, that they have had contact with Aaron Rodgers. They've remained optimistic that he will be a Steeler, but there's just nothing fast and firm yet on him signing with the team, so they continue to develop Mason Rudolph, Will Howard, and OTAs. They would hope that by minicamp May 10th through 12th that he's a part of it. But right now, this has been unpredictable.
To say the least. We're talking about the Steelers, another AFC North team that's got things to do would be the Cincinnati Bengals, because Trey Hendrickson still doesn't have a contract and hasn't been offered one to our knowledge that he particularly likes. What's the deal with Hendrickson?
Well, Shay, sources I've talked to do believe that he is dug in, and when he says that he would miss games without a new contract, that he very well means it, that it's not posturing. Now, we'll see if he misses training camp time and those fines start coming in. A lot of times players start showing up at that point, but they need to have some uncomfortable conversations because there's just a gap. You know, they offered him a contract in the spring. It wasn't what he wanted, and so there's some bad blood right now. But talking to execs around the league, they still expect the Bengals to get something done because the pressure to win now is there.
Yeah, of course. And this is a guy that led the league in sacks last year, which is wild. How about a corner that's on the market? That would be Jalen Ramsey, and maybe trade talks could heat up as early as tomorrow?
Well, so after June 1st, which is Sunday, they can save about $10 million on the cap if they trade him. If they did it now, per se, in May, then that would be an $8.5 million cap hit against the cap. So pretty big swing. So it benefits them to do something in June. They've been engaged with multiple teams from what I'm told. The LA Rams have been one, although there's not really anything moving right now, last I checked on that. So something's going to have to heat up with the team. The problem is that $24 million in guaranteed money he has this year. That is a major holdup.
Yeah, no doubt. Mike McDaniel was asked a lot about him yesterday in his press conference, and he was, mum is the word. Okay, here we go with Kyle Pitts. What's the deal with him?
So I checked in with a source who said that, look, if Atlanta gets the right kind of deal for Kyle Pitts, it very well could come together. I don't think it's a situation where they're aggressively shopping him, but it appears, talking to some other teams, I think Atlanta is at least open to the possibility, and Pitts might be as well. I'm told he loves Atlanta. This is not a situation where he's requesting a trade, but if he has a chance to go to maybe a better offense where he's more featured, you know, he's sort of the third or fourth wheel right now in Atlanta, could be something that he's open to.
Yeah, and he's been pretty durable. 17-game slate in 3 of his 4 NFL seasons, so that's a positive thing. Of course, last but not least here, Cam Ward, who I feel like we have barely talked about. What kind of impression has he been making with the Titans?
Well, the Titans coaches have been really impressed with his work ethic so far. They knew he was a hard worker coming in. I was told they had to kick him out of the offices at times, literally kick him out, because he'll just hang out in the coach's office wanting to get to know the offense and get to know them and what they're running and the whole thing. So from a leadership component, he's been really good. And even though they've been splitting reps, I'm told that that will change. They'll gradually give him more and more first-team reps. He'll have every chance to be the starter for this team. And then they could keep Will Levis around, too. I don't sense a lot of trade buzz right now. He's sort of entrenched as the backup, and they'll go from there.
Yeah, and then they have a veteran backup to help lead the way here with Cam Ward. But living at the office, I mean, what more do you want to hear if you are a head coach? Tennessee opens the season in Denver on September 7th. Jeremy Fowler, thank you.
Thank you, Shay.
Kind enough to take time out of his PTO, if you will, in NYC to join us here on the program. I don't know what it is, man, but I'm hearing out of Cleveland that Shedeur is impressing, Tom, that Shedeur Sanders is 100% in a mix for a starting quarterback job at the Cleveland Browns. I understand it's organized team activity. I understand there's a lot of shorts. There's a lot of, guys that aren't, he's throwing on air maybe, but what are you hearing out of Cleveland, Tom?
Well, let's start with this, Rich. If you said, what type of quarterback is going to thrive in that environment, in OTAs, where it's a lot of 7-on-7, there may be some 11-on-11 mixed in, but there's no pass rush, really no pass rush. There's, helmets. You're trying to play within rhythm. It's going to be a guy who's really, really accurate, and Shedeur absolutely is. So it's not a surprise. Now, I know there have been the statistics that were kept in that first OTA practice that was getting sent around. Doesn't sound like those stats were necessarily accurate, nor can you go apples to apples on one OTA practice, particularly when not all practices this time of year are open. But it would not shock me at all if we're talking about this remaining an open competition with Shedeur Sanders as a part of it as we, get up towards training camp. The real questions are going to be, Rich, if Shedeur or Dylan Gabriel, if two guys who are drafted outside of round 1, typically quarterbacks drafted round 2 or later are not in the mix to start. Certainly not round 3 or later, as both these guys are. Would not surprise me if they're at least alive, because you're talking about 40-year-old Joe Flacco and Kenny Pickett as the other guys in the room. But let's see where we are as we get into training camp. Let's see how the reps are divvied up. I know Kevin Stefanski, every time he's asked about who's going first and who's with the twos, just keeps saying, don't read into it. It doesn't matter. It will start to matter when you get into training camp. That's a limited number of reps. You're trying to not just figure out who your quarterback is going to be, but how do you build the rhythm and timing and tempo in the passing game? If it's all Joe Flacco with the ones as we get through the first couple weeks of training camp and into the preseason, then that would probably be a pretty strong sign that they're going to go with what everybody has thought all along would be the option. If suddenly we see that these other quarterbacks are getting opportunities, maybe they're more open-minded than perhaps it might have seemed on paper.
So why are they splitting reps in Tennessee, Tom? Like, what are you hearing from there? I mean, Will Levis even basically admitted he's not starting for the Tennessee Titans. Quote, he was speaking this week, quote, anyone who's ever been in my situation would agree that it sucks, end quote. What's the point of bringing him along slowly or splitting reps? What do you think?
Well, I think that you look at recent history here, and if you're Brian Callahan and Chad Brinker and Mike Borgonzi, all the powerful players in that organization were figuring out the best way to bring along a number 1 pick. You can look back at recent years and say, okay, how did other teams handle these types of situations? You remember Frank Reich named Bryce Young the starter, I want to say right around this time of year. It was like early June, and he just flat out said, hey, this guy is going to be the starting quarterback. With the Bears, with Caleb Williams, there was no doubt about it. They essentially announced at the draft that, yeah, this guy's going to be starting week 1 for the team. And that's not to say that that's the reason those guys, it certainly in Bryce's case, may have struggled out of the gate. But there is something to be said for, okay, like let's engender competition throughout the program. Let's set the tone that this is how it's going to be. We're not just going to say that's the guy, and then if Cam Ward falls flat on his face and Will Levis has some type of an epiphany and stops turning the ball over and plays great in camp, that you're going, well, we're going to play a guy who hasn't been as good in practice. You want to send the message that practice matters. Again, we've seen other coaches handle things differently. Not to equate, obviously, Frank and Matt Eberflus did not survive their first season with that number 1 pick quarterback. I wouldn't say that that's a direct impact on the situation, but certainly you're looking back through, okay, what has succeeded in the past? What types of environments have these guys come into? And they obviously came to the conclusion that the best thing would be to send the message to Cam from go, even though he has tremendous work ethic, he brings people with him, he does all the things right, still send the message, hey, we're going to start this thing out by you earning that starting job. And every expectation is that, by the time we get into the preseason, that certainly he's going to be that guy.
Okay, so let's just open your book. You tell me, what is the big story for you that we're not talking about or should be talked about or you're hearing about?
Well, I mean, I think we've talked plenty about Aaron Rodgers.
Well, what's the point, though? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, right? Because the only way is to get in his head and to figure it out, right? Not to interrupt you, but
no, you're right. But I do think that, I know you asked me last week, what's the midnight hour? And there's not a clear answer on that because Mike Tomlin in particular has just made abundantly clear he's willing to wait. There is going to come a time, though, Rich. There is going to come a time where there's so much time lost. Does it make sense for the Steelers, a blue blood type of an organization that has never kind of been strung along by a player, certainly not like this, certainly not publicly, much less a 41-year-old quarterback who hasn't played well in 4 years? That time is going to come. The next checkpoint is going to be the mandatory minicamp. That kicks off for the Steelers on June 10th. So you're talking about the next 10 days, we might have an answer. If the answer at that time is, I'm still not telling you what the answer is, that really is going to raise the specter of, are we really going to do this for another 6-7 weeks? And then in turn, the ripple effects on what does that mean for Kirk Cousins, who doesn't have a clear place to go? If we get into training camp and Kirk Cousins is still on the Falcons, does he even want to get traded? Does he want to go someplace else where he doesn't have the reps and doesn't know players or doesn't know the offense? There's the impact on that. And beyond that, there's really not anybody else out there for the Steelers to go and get. I can't think of another situation like this since probably the guy who preceded Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay, when Brett Favre took it all the way to August 18th with the Vikings and then showed up and had, a miraculous run. I think that with Aaron Rodgers, the part that we probably aren't talking about enough, Rich, is this. In my mind, this is going to be an A or an F. This is either going to be similar to Favre coming in